What if I told you that a simple, small-town baker had her life completely transformed one Christmas Eve? A woman who carried deep trauma, who had never been touched by any man, found someone willing to wait as long as it took. But it wasn't just anyone. It was a billionaire, accustomed to getting everything he wanted with a snap of his fingers. What happened that night changed them both forever. This story will make you believe that true love still exists. Tell me in the comments where you're watching this video from. I want to know if this story is reaching far and wide. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like so I know you want more emotional stories like this. Now prepare your heart because this journey will make you laugh, cry, and believe in true love. Snow fell softly over Stowe, Vermont that Christmas Eve, covering the alpine roofs with a white blanket that looked like something out of a holiday movie. Grace watched the flakes through the fogged-up kitchen window of the Pinneroft Lodge, her hands covered in flour as she finalized the last details of the most important dinner of the night. 24 years old, that was her age, but sometimes she felt much older. Her brown eyes, once full of dreams, now carried a caution that came from lessons learned in the most painful way. The white apron contrasted with her olive skin, an inheritance from the mother who had left too soon, leaving her in the care of her grandmother, Evelyn. "Grace!" The sharp voice of the manager, Sylvia, cut through her thoughts like a knife. The guest in Chalet 7 wants his dinner served at 8 hours sharp, and he was very specific. He wants you to deliver it personally. Grace felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Chalet 7 was the most isolated on the property, reserved only for VIP guests seeking absolute privacy, and the man who had been staying there for the past 2 weeks was a mystery that fueled gossip among all the employees. Benjamin Castelli. The name was on the check-in list, but that was all they knew about him. He never ordered room service, never appeared at breakfast, never interacted with other guests. He just walked alone on the woodland trail every morning at dawn, wearing dark clothes that made his tall, imposing figure seem even more enigmatic. "Why me?" Grace asked, trying to control the tremor in her voice. Sylvia rolled her eyes with that superior expression she always used when she could belittle someone. "Because he asked for the baker responsible. And like it or not, you're good at what you do." The compliment came loaded with venom. "Just don't take too long. I'm sure a man like him has more important things to do than chat with the staff." Grace nodded silently, turning her attention back to the silver tray she had prepared with care. Roast turkey with sausage stuffing, honey-glazed ham with pineapple, creamy mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and her specialty, an artisanal gingerbread cake with cream cheese frosting and walnuts. Everything perfect, everything impeccable. It was 7:45 when she finally placed the last cover over the heated dishes. She adjusted her brown hair, tied back in a low bun, checked that her uniform was clean, and took a deep breath. Why was she so nervous? It was just another delivery, just another guest. But something in the air that night felt different. The path to Chalet 7 wound through snow-covered pines. Her boots made a muffled sound against the white ground, and she could see her own breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The Christmas lights strung through the lodge's gardens created a magical, almost unreal atmosphere. When she finally reached the chalet's solid wooden door, Grace hesitated. Her hands were sweating inside her thermal gloves as she held the tray, and her heart was beating erratically. "You're being ridiculous," she chided herself mentally. "Just deliver the food and leave." She rang the doorbell. The door opened almost immediately, as if he had been waiting on the other side, and Grace needed all her willpower not to drop the tray. Benjamin Castelli was unlike any man she had ever seen. Tall, he had to be well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that perfectly filled out the charcoal-colored wool sweater he was wearing. But it wasn't his height or build that left her breathless. It was his eyes, blue like a winter sky, but carrying a depth that seemed to hold 1,000 untold stories. There was something in that gaze that completely disarmed her, a vulnerability hidden beneath layers of composure and elegance. His black hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had run his hands through it repeatedly, and a few days' worth of stubble gave him a less corporate and more human look. "You must be Grace," he said, his voice deep, smooth, with a polished, educated accent. "The baker responsible for making me gain 5 pounds in the last 2 weeks." She blinked, surprised by the informal approach. She had expected something colder, more distant. She hadn't expected the small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Yes, I brought your Christmas dinner, Mr. Castelli. Just Benjamin, please." He stepped back from the door, making room for her to enter. "Mr. Castelli makes me feel like my father is in the room," Grace thought to herself. The inside of the chalet was exactly as she imagined a rich man's refuge would be, sophisticated yet cozy. A stone fireplace crackled in the center of the room, casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls. There were books scattered on the coffee table, a half-empty bottle of wine, and a single glass. No Christmas decorations other than a small, unadorned artificial tree in the corner. "You can put it there on the table." Benjamin indicated the dining table next to the panoramic window overlooking the moonlit mountains. "Thank you for preparing everything with such care. I can tell you put love into what you do." Grace felt her cheeks flush. No one had ever praised her work in such a genuine way. "It's my job," she murmured, starting to arrange the dishes with trembling hands. "No." His voice came from closer, and she realized he was standing beside her, watching her every move. "A job is what you do out of obligation. What you do is art. Every dessert I've tasted had a soul. And this," he pointed to the still-covered cake, "this is the masterpiece, isn't it?" She just nodded, unable to trust her own voice. An awkward silence hung in the air as she finished setting everything up. Just as she was about to say goodbye and flee from that chalet and those blue eyes that seemed to see right through her, Benjamin spoke. "You're spending Christmas alone, aren't you?" The question caught her completely off guard. Grace stared at him, searching his face for mockery or pity, but found only sincere curiosity and perhaps a reflection of his own loneliness. "How did you, I overheard you talking to one of the housekeepers earlier," he admitted, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed nervous. "It wasn't intentional, but the walls in this place aren't exactly soundproof. You said your grandmother is out of state and that you had to work late." Grace felt her defenses rise automatically. She didn't like people knowing about her life. She didn't like seeming pitiful. "I'm used to it. It's not a big deal. It usually isn't for me either." Benjamin picked up a second crystal glass from the sideboard and filled it with wine. "But tonight, I'd prefer company. Will you share this dinner with me?" Grace's world stopped. She looked at him, at the abundant table, at the welcoming fireplace, and then at the door that led back to her small, safe, and lonely life. Every voice in her head screamed to refuse, to leave, to not put herself in a vulnerable situation with a man she didn't know. But there was something in his eyes, a loneliness as deep as her own. A humanity that tore through all her carefully constructed defenses. "I shouldn't," she began, but her own voice sounded weak even to her. "Shouldn't or don't want to?" Benjamin asked softly, holding the glass out to her. "Because if you don't want to, I completely understand. But if it's just the shouldn't that's stopping you, well, it's Christmas. Everyone deserves company on Christmas." Grace looked at the wine glass, at the strong male hand holding it so gently, and then at those blue eyes that seemed to see parts of her she didn't even know existed. And for the first time in 8 years since that terrible day she learned that not all men were trustworthy, Grace made a decision based not on fear, but on something much more dangerous. Hope. "All right," she whispered, accepting the glass. But just for a few hours. The smile that lit up Benjamin's face was like the sun rising after a long winter's night. And Grace had no idea that those few hours would change her life forever. What neither of them knew was that the approaching storm wouldn't just be snow. The wine was good, smooth, velvety, with notes of red berries that warmed Grace's throat as it went down. She didn't usually drink. In fact, this was only the third time she had ever tasted wine. But there was something about the atmosphere in that chalet on that night that made everything different. Benjamin was a surprisingly attentive host. He served her with gentle gestures, never allowing her to feel like an employee doing a favor, but rather a genuine guest. He pulled out her chair for her, waited for her to serve herself first, and when they finally began to eat, his compliments about the food were sincere and specific. "This ham is perfect," he commented, savoring every bite. "How did you get this balance between sweet and salty? It's almost impossible." Grace felt pride bloom in her chest, gradually replacing the initial nervousness. "It's my grandmother's recipe. She uses molasses and a touch of Dijon mustard. The secret is to glaze it 3 times during cooking, always at different temperatures." "Your grandmother must be a wise woman." "She is." A genuine smile curved Grace's lips for the first time. "Evelyn is the strongest woman I know." She realized too late how much she had revealed. Her cheeks flushed and she quickly took another sip of wine, wishing she could suck the words back. Why was she opening up to a stranger? But Benjamin didn't ask invasive questions. He just nodded with understanding, and there was something in his eyes that said he understood the pain of loss in a very personal way. "My mother passed away young, too," he said softly, swirling the wine in his glass. "I was 15, cancer. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for your loss, too." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that exists between two people who recognize each other's pain, who know that some wounds never fully heal. They just learn to coexist with life. The conversation flowed more easily after that. Grace discovered that Benjamin, despite all his wealth and success, was surprisingly down to earth. He talked about his work, something related to technology and innovation, but without the arrogance she expected from someone so successful. He laughed easily, asked genuine questions about her life in Stowe, and listened to every answer as if it truly mattered. "Why are you spending Christmas alone?" Grace asked when they were on their second glass of wine, feeling brave enough to turn the questions around. "A man like you must have, I don't know, dozens of invitations to parties, dinners." Benjamin looked at the fireplace, the flames reflecting in his blue eyes in a way that made them seem even deeper. "That's exactly why," he answered with an honesty that surprised her. "When you have money, Grace, you quickly discover that everyone wants a piece of you. The parties, the dinners, the friends. Most of the time it's just disguised networking, deals, contacts, opportunities. Nobody really cares about—" He paused as if searching for the right words. "The person behind the bank account. That must be very lonely." "It is." He met her gaze with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "That's why I've come here every Christmas for 5 years. Alone, away from everyone and everything. Just existing. No masks, no performances." Grace understood completely, not for the same reasons, but she understood what it was to build walls around your heart, what it was to prefer solitude to the possibility of being hurt again. That's when it started to snow harder. At first, it was just a few heavier flakes hitting the window, but within minutes, the snow turned into a full-blown blizzard. The wind howled around the chalet, rattling the windows and making the wooden structure groan under the pressure. "Oh no!" Grace stood up, rushing to the window. Outside, visibility was practically zero. A thick white curtain covered everything, and she couldn't even distinguish where the garden ended and the trail began. "I have to get back to the main lodge." Benjamin joined her at the window, his expression turning serious. "That's not safe. The trail is at least a 15-minute walk in normal conditions. With this storm, you could get lost in seconds." "But I can't stay here." Panic began to rise in Grace's throat, not from the danger of the storm itself, but from the idea of being trapped here, alone with a man she barely knew. Her old fears began to awaken like dormant beasts. Hey, calm down." Benjamin placed his hands gently on her shoulders, turning her to face him. His eyes were firm but kind. "Take a deep breath with me. You are safe here. I promise." But Grace couldn't control her rapid breathing. Memories she had buried for years began to surface. An older man whispered promises. Hands that advanced even when she said no. The terror of being trapped with no one to hear her scream. "Grace, look at me." Benjamin's voice cut through the panic. "You're having an anxiety attack. I need you to breathe with me. Okay, inhale. Count to 4. Exhale." She focused on those blue eyes, on the calm and steady voice, and gradually her breathing began to even out. Benjamin wasn't touching her beyond the hands on her shoulders, maintaining a respectful distance. There was something in his posture, completely open and non-threatening, that helped calm Grace's inner demons. When she could finally breathe normally, Benjamin guided her back to the sofa near the fireplace, always keeping that safe distance. "I'm sorry," Grace whispered, feeling tears threaten to fall. "I didn't mean to." "You don't have to apologize for anything." Benjamin sat in the armchair across from her, never on the same sofa, respecting her space. "But I need you to know something very important. You are completely safe here. There is a guest room right there that is all yours. The door locks from the inside. You can lock the door and not even see me until the storm passes if that makes you feel better." Grace looked at him, searching for any sign of falsehood, any hint of that predatory interest she had learned to identify. But all she saw was genuine sincerity and real concern for her well-being. "Why are you being so kind?" Benjamin smiled sadly. "Because someone clearly wasn't kind to you in the past, and I'd be a monster to take advantage of this situation." The tears finally fell, not of fear, but of a relief so intense it hurt. How long had it been since she had felt truly safe near a man? She wiped the tears with the back of her hand. You don't need to know this, but when I was 16, an older man pretended to care about me, said all the right things, made all the right promises, and when I finally trusted him, he tried. She didn't need to finish. Benjamin's jaw tightened and his eyes flashed with a contained anger, but it wasn't directed at her. It was anger for her, not at her. I can't change what happened to you, he said, his voice tense with restrained emotion. But I can promise you that as long as you are under this roof with me, you decide everything, every conversation, every space, every moment. And if at any point you want me to back off, I will. No questions, no judgments. Grace nodded, feeling something inside her begin to heal. Just a tiny bit, but it was a start. Thank you, she whispered. The storm continued to howl outside for hours, but inside the chalet, beside the crackling fire, something unexpected happened. They started talking again, this time more deeply, more honestly. Benjamin told her about the pressure of taking over his father's tech empire at 22, about the loneliness of never knowing if people liked him or his money, about how he had built walls so high that now even he couldn't tear them down. Grace talked about her dreams of opening her own bakery one day, about how she felt trapped between the fear of taking risks and the desire for something more, about how baking was the only part of her life where she felt truly free and in control. When the clock struck 2 in the morning, the storm still hadn't let up. Benjamin showed Grace to the guest room, impeccably tidy with hotel-quality linens and a window overlooking the snow-whitened forest. There are clean clothes in the drawer, he pointed to the dresser. They're mine, so they'll be big, but it's better than sleeping in your uniform. The bathroom has fresh towels and amenities. Anything at all. My room is next door. Just knock on the wall. Benjamin? Grace called as he was leaving the room. Yes? Thank you for tonight, for everything. He smiled, and it was the most beautiful smile she had ever seen. Good night, Grace, and Merry Christmas. When the door closed, and Grace heard the reassuring click of the lock, she finally allowed herself to process everything that had happened. She had left the lodge, expecting only to deliver a meal and return to her life. But somehow, on that stormy night, she found something she hadn't known she was looking for. Someone who saw her, truly saw her. As she lay down on the comfortable bed, wearing one of Benjamin's shirts that smelled of expensive cologne and something intangible that was just him, Grace smiled for the first time in a long time. Outside the storm raged, but inside her heart, for the first time in 8 years, there was a small ember of hope beginning to glow, and that ember was about to turn into something much bigger than either of them could have imagined. Christmas morning dawned with a surreal silence. Grace woke up disoriented, taking a few seconds to remember where she was. The sunlight reflecting off the snow created an almost blinding glare that poured into the room through the half-open curtains. She sat up in bed, still wearing Benjamin's shirt, which fit her like a dress, and watched a world completely transformed through the window. The storm had passed, leaving behind a fairy tale scene. The pines were so laden with snow that their branches bowed gracefully toward the ground. The sky was a clear, crystalline blue without a single cloud, and the silence was so absolute she could hear her own heart beating. The smell of fresh coffee wafted to her nostrils, making her stomach rumble. After tidying herself up as best she could, she washed her face, tied her hair in a loose ponytail, and put her uniform back on, which was surprisingly clean and pressed on a chair. Grace left the room. She found Benjamin in the kitchen making breakfast. He was wearing gray sweatpants and his hair was still damp from a shower. He was barefoot, and there was something so intimate and domestic about the scene that Grace felt her heart skip a beat. Good morning. He smiled when he saw her. And my God, that smile should have been illegal. I hope you slept well. I made coffee, but I warn you, my culinary skills are shamefully limited compared to yours. Grace laughed, feeling the tension of the last few days dissolve. Good morning. I slept surprisingly well, actually. They had breakfast together, this time in the soft morning light that made everything less intense, less emotionally charged. It was easy to be with him, Grace realized. Easy in a way it had never been with anyone. There was no need to fill every silence, no pressure to be anything other than who she really was. The trail must be impossible for a few hours, Benjamin commented, looking out the window. The lodge staff will probably clear it by late morning. Do you mind staying a little longer? Grace's heart pounded. She should say no. She should make an excuse, create distance, protect herself. But when she looked into those blue eyes, all she could do was nod. I'd love to. They spent the morning in a surprisingly simple way. Benjamin had an impressive collection of old vinyl records, and he put on classical music at a low volume while they talked. He showed her the books he was reading, an eclectic mix of philosophy, science fiction, and poetry. Grace, in turn, leafed through a book of Robert Frost poems that had belonged to his mother, feeling a connection to something sacred and personal. Love is not begged for, bought, or stolen. Love is given or it is not love, she read aloud, her fingers tracing the words handwritten in the margin of the book. My mother marked that passage, Benjamin said softly, sitting beside her on the sofa but respecting the space between them. She used to say it was the only absolute truth about love. She was right. It was then, in that moment of shared vulnerability, that something in the air changed. Benjamin looked at Grace with an intensity that made every nerve in her body wake up. "Can I ask you a very personal question?" he asked hesitantly. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to." Grace swallowed hard but nodded. "Why is an incredible, intelligent, and beautiful woman like you spending Christmas alone? Is there no one in your life?" The question she knew would come eventually, the question that always came. Grace closed the book gently, handing it back to Benjamin, and got up from the sofa. She walked to the window, hugging her own body in an involuntary defensive gesture. "Because I'm scared." Her voice came out weak but firm. "Very scared." Benjamin said nothing, just waited. And that patient silence, that absence of pressure, was what gave Grace the courage to continue. "After that man, after what he tried to do, I've never been able to trust again. Every time someone showed interest, I saw that day all over again. The promises, the lies, his hands grabbing me while I cried and begged him to stop." The tears began to fall, but she didn't wipe them away. "I was 16, Benjamin. 16, and he was 32. Grace, no." She turned to face him, and there was a fierce bravery in her wet eyes. "You need to know. You need to understand why I'm like this. That day destroyed something in me. My grandmother took me to therapy, did everything right, supported me in every way possible, but some things just don't get fixed completely, you know." Benjamin was on his feet now, but he kept his distance, his fists clenched at his sides as if fighting the urge to hug her. "You are not broken, Grace," he said with a conviction that cut through years of self-deprecation. "You survived. You kept living, working, creating beautiful things with your hands. That isn't being broken. That is strength. But I've never—" The words caught in her throat. To say it out loud was to expose the deepest vulnerability she possessed. "I've never been touched after that day. Not even a kiss. I'm 24 years old and I'm still—" The words died on her lips. Understanding crossed Benjamin's face like lightning. "A virgin," he completed softly, without judgment, only understanding. Grace nodded, feeling her cheeks burn with shame and exposure. "Everyone thinks it's because I'm religious or because I'm waiting for marriage or some other romantic reason. But the truth is, I just can't. Every time someone gets too close, touches too much, I go back to that day, and I freeze. It's like my body shuts down, like I'm trapped in ice." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Grace could see Benjamin's jaw working, his eyes shining with an intense emotion she couldn't name. "Grace, look at me," he asked softly. She did, meeting those blue eyes that seemed capable of seeing through all her defenses. "I need you to understand something very important." Benjamin took one step toward her, then stopped, waiting for silent permission. When she didn't retreat, he took another step and then another until he was standing right in front of her. "What happened to you was not your fault. You didn't ask for it. You didn't deserve it. And you do not have to feel ashamed for being exactly who you are." "But I'm damaged." "No." The word came out with such firmness that Grace fell silent immediately. "You are not damaged. You are an incredible woman who went through something traumatic and is doing the best she can. And if I have anything to say about it," he raised his hand slowly, telegraphing every movement, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When his fingers finally touched her cheeks gently, wiping away the tears, it was with a tenderness that made Grace's heart break and rebuild itself all at once. "You will only be touched when you are ready on your time, at your pace. No pressure, no expectations. And if that day never comes with me, that's okay too." "How can you say that?" Grace whispered, feeling completely exposed and protected at the same time. "We barely know each other." "Why would you be so patient?" Benjamin completed, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her cheek. "Because in the last 2 days I've talked more honestly with you than I have with anyone in the last 5 years. Because when you laugh, it's like the whole world gets brighter. Because when you talk about baking, your eyes light up in a way that makes me want to see you talk about everything you're passionate about." His words were like balm on old wounds. Grace felt something inside her begin to give. Walls she had built so carefully starting to crack. "I'm scared," she admitted in a whisper. "Scared that you'll realize I'm too much baggage. Scared that you'll see me as a charity project. Scared that I only want you for one thing." He finished the sentence. She couldn't. When she nodded weakly, Benjamin moved his hands from her face but captured her hands in his. "Then I'm going to make you a promise right now, Grace. I promise you can hold me to this every single day if you need to. I won't touch you beyond what you allow. I won't push you past what you're comfortable with. And if all we ever have are conversations by the fire and walks in the snow, that will be more than enough for me." "Why?" The question slipped out in a groan. "Why would you do that?" Benjamin smiled. His smile held so much tenderness that Grace felt her heart completely surrender. "Because you, Grace, are worth the wait, no matter how long it takes." And there, on that Christmas morning, with snow falling outside and the fire crackling softly, something magical happened. Grace cried. She cried like she hadn't in 8 years. But these tears weren't from pain or trauma. They were tears of relief, of release, of hope. When Benjamin gently pulled her into a hug, a chaste, protective, non-threatening hug, she let herself melt against his chest. For the first time in almost a decade, she allowed herself to be held by a man without feeling terror. And it was freeing. "Thank you," she whispered against his sweater, feeling his steady heartbeat under her cheek. "Thank you for seeing me, for hearing me, for waiting." "Always, Grace," he answered, his lips brushing the top of her head in a gesture that felt more like a promise than anything else. "Always." And in that hug, in that whispered promise, a story began that neither of them was prepared to live. The trail was cleared around midday. The winter sun shone brightly on Stowe, melting some of the snow and creating little crystalline streams along the paths. It was time for Grace to return to reality. As she finished packing her few belongings, her uniform and her newly restored dignity, she heard Benjamin's voice from the living room. "Grace, can you come here a second?" She found him standing next to the unadorned artificial Christmas tree, holding something wrapped in a silk scarf. "Before you go," he began, his voice holding a vulnerability she hadn't heard before, "I have something for you." "Benjamin, you don't have to." "I know I don't, but I want to." He held the package out to her. "Merry Christmas, Grace." With trembling hands, she accepted the gift. It wasn't an expensive jewelry box or an envelope of cash as part of her had feared. It was something wrapped with care, something personal. When she opened it, her heart stopped. It was the book of Robert Frost poems, the one that had belonged to his mother, the book with handwritten notes in the margins, words from a woman who had left too soon, leaving behind only memories and love. "Benjamin, I can't accept this," Grace said immediately, trying to hand the book back. "This belonged to your mother. It's too valuable, too personal." "Exactly," he said gently, closing her hands around the book, stopping her from returning it. "My mother used to say that the most precious things shouldn't be locked away. They should be shared with people who know how to appreciate them." "And you," his eyes shone with restrained emotion. "You looked at this book for 5 minutes and already understood its essence. You already felt what she felt when she wrote those notes. She would have wanted you to have it. But besides," he added with a small smile, "it's the perfect excuse to see each other again. I'm going to need you to lend it back to me every once in a while so I don't miss it too much." Grace looked at him, at the book in her hands, and felt tears threaten to fall again. No one had ever given her something so meaningful, so loaded with trust and genuine affection. "Thank you," was all she could manage to whisper. "I'll take care of it as if it were my greatest treasure." "I know you will." Benjamin gently touched her face, a gesture that was already becoming familiar and comforting. "And Grace, about seeing each other again. I don't want this to end here. These last few hours they've been the best I've had in a very long time." Her heart hammered. "You go back to New York tomorrow, don't you?" "That was the plan," he admitted. "But I was thinking, what if I canceled my trip? What if I stayed here in Stowe until after New Year's?" Grace blinked. She had to have misheard. "You what?" "Look, I know this sounds crazy." Benjamin ran a hand through his hair in a nervous gesture, which Grace was beginning to find adorable. "We just met, and you have every right to think I'm some obsessed maniac. But I can't just leave and never see you again. Not when I feel that. That this," he gestured between them, "could be something real." "Benjamin, you don't have to answer now," he hurried to say. "I won't pressure you. If you want me to leave, I'll leave. If you want space, I'll give you space, but if—" He paused, looking at her with a seriousness that made her heart race. "If, and it's a big if, you're willing to give me a chance to really get to know you, on your time, by your rules, I'll stay." Grace looked at those sincere blue eyes, at the man who had turned her world upside down in less than 24 hours. All logic screamed to refuse, to protect herself, to not dive headfirst into something so intense so quickly. But her heart, that wounded heart that had hidden for so long, whispered something different. "I'd like that," she finally admitted, feeling a terrifying mix of excitement and fear. "To see you again, to get to know you better. But slowly, Benjamin. Very slowly." The smile that lit up his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Slowly," he agreed, taking her hand and lacing his fingers through hers. "At your pace. Always at your pace." They walked hand in hand down the trail back to the main lodge. The snow melted around them, creating a symphony of drips and small streams. When they reached the kitchen entrance, Benjamin stopped. "So, when can I see you again?" Grace thought for a moment, her heart still racing, but now with anticipation instead of fear. "Tomorrow. I finish my shift at 5. We could, I don't know, get hot chocolate in the village?" "Hot chocolate in the village?" Benjamin repeated, as if memorizing the coordinates to a priceless treasure. "It's a date." "A date?" Grace confirmed, feeling her cheeks flush. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't, he planted a soft kiss on her forehead, chaste, respectful, but loaded with unspoken promises. "Until tomorrow, Grace. Until tomorrow, Benjamin." As she watched him walk back up the trail, his tall, elegant figure standing out against the snow, Grace clutched the book to her chest and smiled. A real, genuine smile that came from deep inside her, a place that had been dormant for a long time. When she entered the kitchen, she was immediately met by Sylvia. "So," the manager asked, her voice sharp with her usual acidity, "spent the night with the VIP guest? I hope you were professional." But for the first time in 8 years, Grace didn't feel diminished or ashamed by the malicious insinuation. Instead, she smiled. "Completely professional," she answered with newfound confidence. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to start preparing the appetizers for lunch." As she worked, shaping dough and creating small edible works of art, Grace realized something fundamental. For the first time in a long time, she was excited about the future. Not terrified, not resigned, but genuinely excited. And it was all because of a man who promised to wait, a man who saw her scars and chose to stay, a man who gave her the most valuable gift anyone could give, time and patience. But what Grace didn't know yet was that Benjamin's world was far more complicated than she imagined, and that keeping that promise would be tested in ways neither of them expected. The following days unfolded like a dream Grace was afraid to wake up from. True to his word, Benjamin showed up at the lodge's bakery every day, always with a different excuse to sample her latest creations. "Is this pistachio fudge for scientific research, or do you just want to see me get fat?" he asked, already, on his 4th piece, savoring it with comical concentration. Grace laughed, drying her hands on her apron as she watched him enjoy each bite with almost exaggerated pleasure. "Consider it your contribution to the advancement of American pastry." Benjamin feigned a dramatic sigh, but his eyes sparkled with amusement. Their routine settled in naturally, organically. Benjamin respected Grace's work hours, never distracting her when she had important orders. But whenever she had a break, there he was, with fresh coffee or a witty comment that made her forget her fatigue. When her shift ended, they explored Stowe together. Benjamin, despite having visited the town for 5 years, had never really gotten to know its charms. He'd always isolated himself in the chalet, avoiding crowds and interactions. But with Grace, everything was different. She took him to Moss Glen Falls, where they walked the wooded trail surrounded by towering trees that seemed like silent guardians. The air was fragrant with pine and damp earth, and the late afternoon light created golden reflections on the water. "My grandmother brought me here for the first time when I was 7, Grace shared, her eyes distant with the memory. "I thought it was the most magical place in the world. I still do." Benjamin watched her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Can I hold your hand?" The question, always asked and never assumed, made Grace feel simultaneously protected and valued. She held out her hand, and when his long, warm fingers enveloped hers, she felt a wave of warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Always," she replied, and the word carried more meaning than just that moment. They visited the village promenade, where Grace insisted on buying artisanal chocolate, because, as she put it, "You can't come to Stowe and not eat local chocolate." Benjamin tried to pay, but she was faster, holding out her own bills with a challenging smile. "My treat this time," she said, pride in her voice. "You may have more zeros in your bank account, but my money is worth just as much as yours." Benjamin didn't argue. Instead, he accepted with an exaggerated bow that made her laugh out loud. "Madam, I thank you for your generosity." They dined at small local trattorias, places Grace had known since childhood, far from the expensive tourist restaurants. Benjamin seemed fascinated by everything: the simple but delicious food, the relaxed conversations with owners who had known Grace forever, the authenticity of a life that didn't revolve around appearances or status. "They're different here," Grace commented one night as they shared a fondue dinner at a cozy restaurant overlooking the town's lights. "They are," Benjamin smiled, dipping a piece of bread into the melted cheese. "It's because here I'm just Benjamin, not the CEO, not the Castelli heir, not the man who moves millions with a signature, just me." "And who are you, Benjamin?" Grace asked softly, her eyes seeking his across the candlelight. When you take away all the labels and expectations, he was silent for a long moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Honestly, I'm still figuring that out," he finally admitted. "I spent so long being who my father needed me to be, who the company needed me to be, who the board expected me to be, that I forgot to find out who I wanted to be. But here with you," his fingers found hers on the table, "for the first time I feel like I can find out." Grace's heart ached at the raw vulnerability in his words. "And who do you want to be?" "Someone real," Benjamin answered without hesitation. "Someone who matters not for the money he has, but for the man he is. Someone who deserves." He paused, his eyes fixed on hers. "Someone who deserves you." Grace's cheeks flushed violently. "You already do, Benjamin." But she saw the doubt in his eyes, the same fear that she carried. Two wounded hearts, two souls who had learned to protect themselves, trying to find the courage to risk again. The days turned into a week, and in that week, something magical happened. Grace began to heal. Little things that once terrified her became easier. When Benjamin put his arm around her shoulders during a night walk because she was shivering from the cold, she didn't freeze. When he suggested they watch the sunset sitting close together on a park bench, she didn't feel the need to maintain physical distance. Every touch was telegraphed, every advance was consented, and gradually her body began to understand that not every man was a threat, that this specific man was safe. The lodge staff naturally began to gossip. "Look at Grace with the millionaire," whispered Lauren, the receptionist, to Anna, the housekeeper, as they watched. Benjamin waited for Grace to finish her shift. Who would have thought our shy little baker would snag such a big fish? "It won't last," Sylvia, the manager, added with poorly disguised venom. "Men like him don't end up with girls like her. It's just a holiday fling. When January comes, he'll go back to his world and forget she exists." Grace heard it all from the other side of the kitchen door, and the words stabbed like knives because part of her, that scared, insecure part, believed Sylvia might be right. But then Benjamin would appear with that smile that was only for her, hold her hand as if it were the most precious thing in the world, and all the doubts would dissipate, at least temporarily. One afternoon, he surprised her by showing up with climbing gear. "You said you always wanted to climb that rock formation at Eagle's Peak, but never had the courage," he explained, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "So I hired an instructor. We're doing it together." "Are you crazy?" Grace laughed, but her heart was pounding. "I'm going to be terrified up there." "No, you won't." Benjamin took her hand, serious now. "Because I'll be right beside you, and if you want to come down at any time, we'll come down. No judgment, no disappointment." "But Grace," he gently stroked her face, "you've spent the last 8 years letting fear stop you from living. How about we try something different together?" And she went. With her legs shaking and her heart in her throat, Grace climbed that rock. Several times she thought about giving up, about giving in to the terror that threatened to paralyze her. But every time she looked to the side, there was Benjamin, encouraging her with soft words and that confident smile. When they finally reached the top and she saw Stowe stretching out below her like a perfect miniature, Grace began to cry, not from fear, but from pure, liberating joy. "I did it," she whispered, incredulous. "I really did it." "You were always capable," Benjamin said, wrapping her in a hug from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder as they admired the view together. "You just needed someone to remind you." And in that moment, at the top of that mountain, with the wind messing up their hair and the sun warming their faces, Grace realized something terrifying and wonderful at the same time. She was falling in love, deeply, irrevocably, terribly, in love with Benjamin Castelli. And that scared her more than any height ever could. But what she didn't know was that the real fear was just beginning. New Year's Eve arrived wrapped in a fog of anticipation and nervousness. Stowe was celebrating. The streets were decorated with thousands of lights, music echoing from every corner. Tourists and locals mixed in a celebration that transcended differences. Grace had managed to get the night off, a small miracle considering it was one of the busiest dates of the year for the lodge. She got ready with care in the small apartment she shared with 2 co-workers, choosing a simple navy blue knit dress that highlighted her discreet curves and matched her brown eyes. "You look beautiful," her roommate Jessica commented, watching her apply light makeup. "That man is very lucky." "You think so?" Grace asked, her hands trembling slightly as she applied her mascara. "People are talking so much, saying this won't go anywhere." "Bless, people are jealous," Jessica cut in gently but firmly. "Grace, I've known you for 3 years. I've never ever seen you glow the way you're glowing now. Whatever this man is doing, he's doing right by you, and that's all that matters." The words warmed Grace's heart, giving her the courage she needed. Benjamin picked her up promptly at 8. He was devastatingly attractive in dark trousers and a wool coat that accentuated his broad shoulders. But it was the bouquet of wildflowers in his hands that made her heart melt. "They're not imported roses because I figured you'd prefer something more." "You," he explained, holding out the flowers. "I picked them on the trail near the chalet this afternoon." Grace accepted the bouquet, inhaling the delicate scent of lavender and wild daisies. It was perfect, exactly the kind of gift she would value more than any expensive jewelry. "They're beautiful, Benjamin." "Thank you." He took her not to one of the grand events happening at the luxury hotels, but to a local community party with live music and fireworks. It was perfect, special but not intimidating. Festive yet intimate. They walked around, the path now lit by lanterns that created magical reflections on the dark water. The live music, a band playing classic American songs, created a nostalgic and romantic atmosphere. "Dance with me?" Benjamin extended his hand as the band began a soft rendition of "Can't Help Falling in Love." Grace hesitated. Dancing meant physical closeness. It meant being held. It meant vulnerability. But when she looked into those blue eyes, she saw only tenderness and patience. "Okay," she whispered, placing her hand in his. Benjamin guided her to the improvised dance area with natural grace. His hand on her waist was firm but respectful, maintaining an appropriate distance. They moved to the rhythm of the music, and Grace gradually allowed herself to relax against him. "You're a good dancer," she commented, surprised. "Mandatory ballroom lessons as a teenager," he admitted with a smile. "My father believed every businessman should know how to dance for corporate events. It was one of the few lessons of his I didn't hate." "Tell me about him," Grace asked softly. "Your father? You never talk much about him. Benjamin's face darkened slightly, but he didn't look away. My father was complicated, brilliant in business, ruthless when necessary, respected and feared in equal measure. He loved my mother intensely, and when she died, part of him died with her. He buried himself in work, and I became an extension of the company, the perfect heir, the ideal successor. He molded me to take over his empire before I was even old enough to vote. That must have been a lot for a kid. It was, Benjamin admitted, his hands tightening slightly on her waist. But I didn't know there was another option. When he died 3 years ago, I took over everything, the company, the responsibilities, the legacy, and I realized I was living his life, not mine. Is that why you come to Stowe alone? Grace asked, beginning to understand. To escape that life? It was, he corrected gently. But this year, I came and found something I didn't know I was looking for. Their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to electrify. Grace felt her heart race, a mixture of desire and fear coursing through her veins. The band started playing a faster tune, and more couples joined the dance. The area was getting more crowded as midnight approached. But for Grace, there was only Benjamin. They talked about everything and nothing as they danced. He told funny stories about disastrous corporate meetings, and she shared childhood memories with her grandmother. They laughed together, and that shared laughter was more intimate than any physical touch. With 5 minutes until midnight, Benjamin guided her to a spot further from the crowd, near the trees surrounding the path. From there, they had a perfect view of the sky where the fireworks would be launched. "Grace," he began, and there was a seriousness in his voice that made her pay full attention. "These days with you have been the best of my life, and I know we're going slow, respecting your time, and I am completely on board with that. But I need you to know I'm not just passing time with you. He searched for the right words. "I'm falling in love with you, and if that scares you, that's okay. We can keep going slow, but I didn't want to go into the new year without you knowing." Grace's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Benjamin, you don't have to say anything right now," he hurried on. "I just wanted you to know where I stand." The countdown began. All around them, hundreds of voices shouted numbers. 10, 9, 8. Grace looked at this man who had turned her world upside down in just 1 week. This man who saw her, who heard her, who waited. This man who was falling in love with her, not despite her scars, but including them. 7, 6, 5. And she realized she couldn't lie to herself anymore. She couldn't pretend she didn't feel what she so clearly felt. 4, 3, 2. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered, and the words came out like a confession and a release. 1 Happy New Year. Fireworks exploded in the sky, painting the night with vibrant colors. But Benjamin only had eyes for her. "Can I kiss you?" he asked softly, his hand gently cupping her face. Grace felt the fear try to creep in, tried to bring back old, painful memories. But for the first time, she fought it. Because this man was not that man. This moment was not that moment. "Yes," she whispered. "Please." Benjamin leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind. When his lips finally touched hers, it felt like the entire world stopped. The kiss was sweet, soft, respectful, nothing demanding or dominant. His lips moved against hers with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. It was the first kiss of her life that was given with love, not taken by force. When they pulled apart, they were both breathless and emotional. "Happy New Year, Grace," Benjamin whispered against her lips. "Happy New Year, Benjamin." They watched the rest of the fireworks display in an embrace, and for the first time in her life, Grace didn't feel afraid of being touched. She felt safe, loved, whole. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered worries she tried to ignore. What about when January comes? What about when he has to go back to New York? What about when his reality and yours collide? Grace pushed the thoughts away, choosing to live in this perfect moment. But deep down, she knew she couldn't live in a bubble forever. Reality was about to come knocking, and it would be much harsher than either of them imagined. January arrived with the inevitable weight of reality. The day Grace had been dreading finally dawned. Benjamin had to go back to New York. They were sitting in the same chalet where it had all begun, the fireplace crackling softly as the first week of the new year came to an end. Benjamin held her hands in his thumbs tracing comforting circles on her skin. "I have meetings on Monday that I can't cancel," he explained, and there was genuine frustration in his voice. "They're with international investors that were scheduled months ago. If I don't show up, I could jeopardize deals that affect hundreds of employees. Grace nodded, fighting the lump forming in her throat. She knew this day would come. She knew the magic bubble they had created would eventually burst, but knowing didn't make it any easier. I understand, she said, her voice sounding firmer than she expected. You have responsibilities. I always knew this was temporary. No, Benjamin squeezed her hands tighter. It's not temporary, Grace, not for me. I'm coming back every weekend. It's only about a 6-hour drive or an hour flight if I really need it. I'll leave NYC on Friday night and go back Sunday night. But we can make this work. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe, but years of disappointment and Sylvia's venomous voice echoing in her head made it difficult. Benjamin, you have a whole life in New York. Business, social commitments, a world I can't even imagine. How is this going to work when you realize that? That what? He interrupted her, turning her to face him directly. When I realize that you're worth more than any corporate meeting, when I realize that one night talking with you is better than any charity gala full of fake people. I've already realized that, Grace. The question is, do you believe me? Her words caught. Because honestly, she didn't know if she did. Not because of him, but because of the insecurities she carried. I want to believe, she whispered finally. But I'm so scared, Benjamin. He pulled her into a hug, his lips pressed against the top of her head. I know, and I'm not going to lie and say it will be easy. Distance is hard, but Grace, if this is real, and I know it is, we'll find a way. When he left the next morning, Grace felt as if a piece of her was being torn away. She watched him get into the executive car that picked him up, elegant in his business suit that was so different from the casual clothes he wore in Stowe. In that moment, he looked less like the Benjamin she knew, and more like the billionaire CEO the world saw, and that terrified her. The first few days were hard but manageable. Benjamin called every night, constant texts during the day whenever he had a break. He shared details of his meetings, asked for her advice on decisions, and genuinely seemed interested in every detail of her day. How did the birthday order go? He asked on a Wednesday night, his voice slightly muffled over the connection. Perfect. The client was thrilled with the 3-tier cake, Grace replied, feeling pride warm her chest. I took pictures to show you. Send them to me. I want to show everyone in my office how talented my girlfriend is. My girlfriend? The words made her heart leap every time. On Friday, as promised, Benjamin returned. He arrived exhausted but radiant, pulling her into a hug the moment he saw her. A week has never felt so long, he murmured against her hair. And for one perfect weekend, everything was magic again. They explored new trails, ate at their favorite restaurant, watched the sunset from the church steeple lookout. Grace almost managed to forget her worries. But then Monday came again and the cycle resumed. Second week, third week. It was in the fourth week that everything started to fall apart. Grace was on her work break, idly scrolling through her phone when a notification caught her eye. It was a high society gossip account from NYC that she had started following without Benjamin's knowledge. A masochistic attempt to understand his world. And there it was, a photo of Benjamin at a gala. He looked impeccable in a tuxedo, surrounded by powerful men and stunning women in dresses that probably cost more than Grace's annual salary. But it wasn't him that caught her eye in the photo. It was the woman by his side, tall, blonde, with a red dress that looked painted onto her perfect body. She was laughing at something Benjamin had apparently said, her hand resting casually on his arm. The photo's caption read, Benjamin Castelli and model Isabella Vance at the Denver Children's Hospital Gala. The couple was radiant. The couple. The words hammered in Grace's head like a death sentence. She knew rationally that it was probably just sensationalist gossip. She knew. Benjamin had to attend events like these for his business. But seeing that photo, seeing him in that world so distant from hers, surrounded by women who were everything she was not, the old insecurities came flooding back with full force. Sylvia, as if she had a radar for vulnerability, chose that moment to walk through the break room. Oh, Grace, I saw the photos of your little boyfriend at the event last night. Her voice was syrupy, falsely sympathetic. He was so well accompanied. Isabella Vance is gorgeous, isn't she? I think they dated a few years ago. Or are they still? You know how it is, high society gossip is so confusing. Every word was a carefully placed stab. He was there for work, Grace said, trying to sound confident. Of course, Sylvia agreed with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But you have to understand, dear, men like him, they have social obligations. They need dates who know how to behave in those environments, who know the right people, wear the right clothes. It's simply practical. Grace felt nausea rise in her throat. "Excuse me," she muttered, standing up abruptly and leaving the break room before Sylvia could see the tears threatening to fall. Locked in the bathroom, Grace looked at the photo again. She studied every detail. Benjamin's impeccable tux, the luxurious setting, the important people. And then she looked at her own reflection in the mirror. Simple baker's uniform, hair pulled back in a practical bun, no makeup because she worked in a kitchen. They were from different worlds, completely, hopelessly different. And for the first time, Grace began to question if love was really enough to cross that abyss. When Benjamin called that night, she let it go to voicemail. And when he tried again, she replied with a short text. Tired. Let's talk tomorrow. But tomorrow she was distant too. And the next day. And the next? Benjamin noticed. Of course he noticed. His messages became more frequent, more worried. Grace, is everything okay? You seem distant. Did I do something wrong? Please tell me, love, I'm worried. Call me. But Grace was paralyzed by fear. Fear of confronting him and finding out her worst suspicions were true. Fear that he would eventually realize she wasn't enough for his world. Fear that Sylvia was right. On Friday, when Benjamin arrived in Stowe as usual, Grace was different. Cold, distant building walls he had worked so hard to tear down, and he didn't understand why. What was supposed to be a romantic reunion was about to turn into the biggest fight they'd ever had, and possibly the last. Benjamin waited for Grace at the lodge entrance, just as he did every Friday. But this time, when she finally appeared, there was something different in her eyes, a coldness he hadn't seen since that first night, when she still saw him as a threatening stranger. Hi, she greeted him without emotion, not moving in for the hug that had become their ritual. Hi, Benjamin repeated, confused. Are you okay? I'm just tired, Grace cut him off, starting to walk toward the village without waiting for him. Benjamin followed, feeling the distance between them grow with every step. They ate in intense silence at their favorite restaurant, but the food tasted like ash. All his attempts to start conversations were met with monosyllabic replies. Grace, please, he finally said, putting his fork down. I know something is wrong. You've been different since Tuesday. What happened? She stared at him, and there was a hardness in her eyes that cut like glass. I saw the pictures from the event. You and Isabella Vance, you looked great together. Understanding crossed Benjamin's face like lightning. Grace, that was just what? She interrupted, her voice rising involuntarily. Other diners started to look. Just work, just appearances. You didn't even mention you were going to a gala. Didn't mention you'd be with your ex-girlfriend. My ex from 4 years ago, Benjamin defended himself, keeping his voice low with effort. Isabella was there because her company sponsors the hospital. I was there because my company also sponsors it. It was a coincidence, Grace. And I didn't mention it because it was just another one of those boring corporate events I have to attend. Right, Grace laughed humorlessly. Because galas with beautiful models and expensive dresses are so boring. Meanwhile, I was here in a flower-stained uniform, feeling completely ridiculous for thinking that we could actually work. Benjamin reached out to touch her hand, but she pulled it away. Don't do this, he pleaded, and there was real pain in his voice. Don't diminish yourself because of insecurities. You know who I choose. You know that I don't know anything. Grace exploded, tears finally spilling over. I don't know what your world is like, Benjamin. I don't know the people, you know. I don't go to the places you go. I'm just a small-town baker who was stupid enough to believe a fairy tale could be real. The silence that followed was deafening around them. Other diners pretended not to be paying attention, but it was obvious they were. Benjamin threw some bills on the table, far more than the check, and took Grace's hand firmly. We're going to talk in private now. He practically dragged her out of the restaurant, walking quickly through the streets of Stowe until they reached the edge of the woods. Now quiet and deserted in the cold January night, the full moon reflected on the snow like melted silver. Now you listen to me. Benjamin turned her to face him, his hands firm but gentle on her shoulders. Really listen, Grace, because I am done with you deciding on your own how this story is going to end. Benjamin, no, my turn. His voice was tense with restrained emotion. You want to know about my world? You want to know what it's like? It's lonely. It's fake. It's full of people who smile to your face while calculating how to use you. It's events where I have to smile and pretend to care about causes that I know half those millionaires are just using for image laundering. It's endless meetings discussing profits and losses while I forget why I started any of this. He stopped to breathe, his blue eyes shining with intensity under the moonlight. And then I come here and I find you. And for the first time in years, I remember. I remember what it's like to laugh for real. I remember what it's like to talk to someone who cares about who I am, not what I have. I remember what it's like to just live. But for how long? Grace whispered, the tears falling freely now. For how long until you get tired of traveling every week? For how long until you realize I can't give you what women like Isabella can? I don't know how to wear designer dresses. I don't know how to talk about contemporary art or international investments. I'm just me, Benjamin. And in the end, that's not going to be enough. Benjamin pulled her hard into his arms, one hand at the back of her neck, forcing her to look at him. You're right. You can't give me what Isabella or any other woman from that world can. You know why? Because they would give me more of the same. More appearances, more superficiality, more loneliness wrapped in expensive dresses. But you? You give me truth. You give me genuine laughter and real conversations. You give me a reason to wake up on Friday. You give me something money can't buy, a home. The words hit Grace like a wave, knocking down her carefully erected defenses. I'm so scared, she confessed, her face buried in his chest. Scared I'm not enough. Scared you'll realize you deserve more. Scared of giving myself completely only to be destroyed when you leave. Then stop being scared alone, Benjamin murmured against her hair. Be scared with me. Build this with me. But don't push me away because you're trying to protect yourself from a pain that might not even happen. Because know this, Grace, the only way you lose me is if you push me away. They stood there for long minutes just holding each other as the moon witnessed silently. I'm sorry, she finally said, for doubting you. For letting my insecurities speak louder, and I'm sorry for not realizing how much this was affecting you. Benjamin gently pulled her back so he could look in her eyes. I'll make you a deal. From now on, no more silences. If something is bothering you, you tell me and I'll do the same. No holding it in, no assuming. We talk always, deal? Grace nodded, a small smile finally appearing. Deal! He smiled too, wiping the remaining tears from her face with his thumbs. And about Isabella and any other woman from that world, I don't choose them. I choose you every time without hesitation. I choose you, and I'm going to keep choosing you until you believe you're worthy of being chosen. This time when he leaned in to kiss her, Grace met him halfway. The kiss was different from the previous ones. More urgent, more desperate, loaded with the relief of a resolved fight and the fear of almost losing each other. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. Come to the chalet, Benjamin asked softly. Just to talk, I promise, but I don't want to leave you yet. Grace should have said no. It was late. She had worked the next day, and being alone with him in an isolated chalet was playing with fire, but she didn't want the night to end either. Okay, she agreed, but just to talk. They walked hand in hand back to the chalet, and this time the conversation flowed freely. Benjamin told her about the pressures he was facing at work, about how he was considering delegating more responsibilities to have more time for her. Grace talked about her dream of opening her own bakery, but also her fears of failing. What if I'm not good enough? She asked, curled up on the sofa next to him, the fireplace crackling softly. What if I open a bakery and no one comes? Impossible, Benjamin said with conviction. Your pastries are edible art, but Grace, if you really want to do this, I can help. Not with money, he hurried to add when he saw her start to protest. With knowledge. I have contacts who can help you with a business plan, marketing, strategy. You bring the talent and the passion. I connect you with the right people, equal partners. Grace considered the offer. Part of her wanted to refuse proudly, but the pragmatic part recognized it would be foolish to waste valuable resources out of sheer pride. Equal partners, she finally agreed. That means if you help me with business, I'll teach you how to cook. Because if you're going to keep coming here every weekend, you need to at least know how to make decent scrambled eggs. Benjamin laughed, the sound rich and genuine. Deal. They talked into the early morning, rebuilding bridges and strengthening foundations. And when Grace finally left at 3 a.m., insisting she needed at least a few hours of sleep, they were stronger than before the fight. But there was something Grace hadn't told him, something she had found out that morning before work. Sylvia had resigned and recommended someone to take her place, someone from New York, someone from Benjamin's corporate world. And Grace had a terrible feeling that the storm they had just weathered was only the calm before something much worse. because the universe has a cruel way of testing the very thing we fear most. A week passed since the reconciliation by the lake. A week of more honest conversations, more frequent texts, of Benjamin sharing details of his day he used to omit. Grace felt more secure, more confident in their relationship until that Tuesday. The new lodge manager had arrived the day before. Chloe Rogers, 32, a hospitality management degree from Cornell. Elegant, articulate, with an impressive resume. Grace should have been happy to have a professional boss after years of dealing with Sylvia's bitterness. But there was something odd. Chloe knew Benjamin. "So you're the famous Grace," Chloe said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes when she introduced herself in the kitchen. "Benjamin told me about you." Grace's stomach sank. "You know each other?" "Oh yes. We worked together for 3 years at Castelli Technologies. I was the director of human resources before deciding to switch fields." Chloe poured herself a coffee, completely at ease. "Benjamin is an incredible boss, demanding but fair and very, very dedicated to his work." There was something in the way she said dedicated that sounded intimate. Throughout that week, Chloe found excuses to mention Benjamin. Little comments about their past, stories about corporate events, references to inside jokes Grace didn't understand.
"Oh, that time Benjamin almost missed his flight to Tokyo because of an extra meeting," Chloe laughed to another employee, but her eyes were fixed on Grace. "I literally had to drag him to the airport."
"He's such a workaholic, he forgets to live." Every comment was a subtle jab. A reminder that Chloe knew Benjamin in a way Grace never would. The corporate Benjamin, the CEO Benjamin, the Benjamin that existed far from Stowe. Grace tried to ignore it, tried to focus on work, on the loving texts Benjamin sent, on the nightly calls where he shared details of his day. But the seeds of doubt once planted are hard to uproot. On Thursday night, Grace was finishing an order when she heard familiar voices at the reception. Curious, she peeked through the kitchen door and froze. Benjamin was there. On a Thursday, a day earlier than expected, and he wasn't alone. Chloe was with him, laughing at something he'd said, her hand touching his arm lightly in a gesture that seemed rehearsed in its naturalness. "So good to see you again, Benjamin," Chloe was saying. "When I heard you were the VIP guest who came every weekend, I was so thrilled." "We have so much to catch up on," Chloe said, her voice light, but there was an undertone of something unspoken. Benjamin nodded, his posture polite, but there was a subtle shift, a slight retreat. Grace noticed it, or rather, she would have, if the jealousy that suddenly gripped her hadn't clouded everything else. "He came a day early and didn't even tell me, but here he is, chatting so comfortably with Chloe," she thought, her stomach sinking. She slipped back into the kitchen, heart pounding, hands trembling. She tried to focus on decorating the cake, but her hands betrayed her. The sugar flowers came out all wrong, lopsided and imperfect. 15 minutes later, Benjamin appeared in the kitchen, his smile the same one that usually melted her heart. "Surprise," he said, arms open, eager to pull her into a hug. "I managed to rearrange my meetings to spend more time with you this weekend." Grace didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the cake, hands stilling as she replied, her voice cold. "That's nice. You should have let me know. I'm busy." Benjamin's arms fell to his sides, his confusion evident. "Grace, what's wrong? Why didn't you tell me you knew Chloe?" Grace cut in, her voice tight with frustration. Benjamin's brow furrowed, slowly processing her words. "Because I didn't think it was relevant. We worked together. Years ago." "Yes, but years ago," Grace repeated, her voice edged with accusation. "Years of working together, building a history, and you never thought it was worth mentioning that your former colleague is now my boss?" Benjamin's face shifted, the pieces falling into place. "Chloe mentioned she was moving to Vermont when I asked her for a manager recommendation for the lodge, but I had no idea she'd end up here." "And why does it matter?" he asked, his tone lighter now, almost dismissive. "She's just a former coworker." "Just?" Grace laughed, but the sound was hollow. "She spent the whole week reminding me of how well she knows you, of all the stories you share, of the world you two have in common, that world, a world I'll never belong to." "And you don't think it matters?" Her frustration was rising with each word. Benjamin's voice started to raise, the tension building between them. "We've talked about this before, Grace. I chose you." Grace didn't flinch. "You say that, but then you show up here with her, laughing, so comfortable, and I realize you share something I'll never understand. She knows your world. She belongs there." "I don't," Benjamin's patience snapped. "Stop deciding where you belong," he shouted. Stop using your insecurities as an excuse to push me away. My insecurities? Grace's voice shook with the force of her anger. My insecurities come from you living a double life. Here you're one person, and in New York you're someone else. And I never know which one is real. They're both real, Benjamin said, his voice low with frustration. Yes, I'm a CEO, I have responsibilities. But I'm also the man who loves you. Why can't that be enough? Why does that have to be a contradiction? Grace's heart was pounding now, her fears speaking louder than reason. Because eventually you'll have to choose. When it comes down to it, when you really have to choose between your empire and me, we both know what the choice will be. The silence that followed was deafening. Benjamin stared at her as if she'd just struck him. You really believe that? He asked, his voice barely a whisper, full of disbelief. After everything we've been through, after everything we've built, you really think I'd choose money over you? Grace wanted to take the words back, to pull them from the air before they could hurt him. But the fear was too strong, too overwhelming. I think you haven't had to really choose yet. And when you do, yes, I think you'll realize that I'm not worth everything you'd have to sacrifice. Benjamin took a step back, as if physically recoiling from the pain. Wow, he said, his voice breaking. The hurt in his words shattered Grace's heart. So nothing I've done matters? All the trips, all the promises, the patience, none of it proves anything to you? No, she whispered. He raised a hand to stop her, cutting her off. You know what the problem is, Grace? It's not me. It's not the distance. It's not my money. It's not Chloe or Isabella or any other woman. He paused, his voice growing more intense. It's you. You don't believe you're worthy of being loved. And so you're sabotaging this before I can hurt you. The words hit her like a punch to the gut, but they were true, and they cut deeper than she could have imagined. But here's the reality, Grace, he continued, his voice steady now, though it trembled at the edges. I can't do this alone. I can't fight for both of us. I can't convince you that you're enough if you don't believe it. I can't build a relationship when you're constantly waiting for it to fall apart. Grace's world was spinning. She felt the ground beneath her give way, but she didn't know how to fix it. So what are you saying? She asked, her voice trembling, heart breaking. Benjamin looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes full of so much pain and conflict it made her chest ache. I'm saying that I need you to decide. Either you trust me and we build this together with all the challenges that will come, or you keep living in fear and I stop fighting against that fear. You're giving me an ultimatum, Grace whispered, a lump forming in her throat. I'm giving you a choice, Benjamin corrected her, his voice barely audible now. Because I love you, Grace. I love you in a way that scares me. But I can't love for both of us. And then, without another word, he left. Grace heard his footsteps fade, the front door slam shut, and then... silence. 2 weeks passed. 14 days of no calls, no texts, no signs of Benjamin. Grace was hollow. She moved through life on autopilot, waking up, going to work, coming home, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling for hours before falling into restless sleep. Everything she touched at the bakery came out wrong, perfect on the outside but empty inside. You need to call him, Jessica said one night, sitting on Grace's bed with 2 pints of ice cream. Grace, you're withering away. Grace's voice was barely a whisper. He gave me a choice, and I chose fear. Why would he want me back? Because he loves you, you stubborn idiot, Jessica replied bluntly. That man drove 6 hours every week just to see you. Canceled meetings, rearranged his whole life. And you threw it in his face. I know, Grace cried, the tears coming again. I ruined everything. I'm a coward who can't believe someone could actually love me. Then fix it, Jessica said simply. Call him. Go to New York if you have to. But fix it before it's too late. But Grace couldn't. The shame, the fear, the certainty that she had already ruined it all. It paralyzed her. Until the call came. It was almost midnight on a Thursday. Grace hesitated before answering. The voice on the other end was familiar, but distant. It's me, Cousin Rose. Grandma Evelyn had a stroke. She's being transferred to Burlington now. It's serious, Grace. Grace's world stopped. Her grandmother, the woman who had been her rock, was in danger. I'm on my way, Grace said, voice tight with panic. She didn't wait. She grabbed clothes, texted Chloe, and rushed out the door, feeling like she was losing control of everything. When Grace arrived at the hospital, her body moving on autopilot, she found Rose in the waiting room. How is she? She's been in surgery for an hour, Rose explained, hugging her. The doctor said it's risky, but she's strong. She'll make it. Grace collapsed into a chair, unable to breathe, unable to think. The weight of everything, losing Benjamin, the uncertainty about her grandmother, was too much. I need coffee, Grace murmured, her hands shaking as she walked down the hall to the vending machine. The tears flowed freely now, falling in a steady stream. She didn't hear him approach. Grace, the voice was unmistakable. It was Benjamin. She turned slowly, heart in her throat, certain she was hallucinating. But no, he was standing there, wrinkled clothes, several days' stubble, eyes red with exhaustion. Why are you here? Grace asked, her voice barely a whisper. Rose called me, Benjamin said simply. She had my number from the family dinner. She said you needed someone. Grace's breath caught in her throat. But New York. You left everything, Benjamin interrupted, taking a step forward. I was in a meeting when she called. I walked out, got in the car, and drove 6 hours. Because you need me, and when you need me, nothing else matters. Grace's body broke then. She sobbed, overwhelmed by everything she had felt, everything she had lost. Benjamin held her, his arms strong, steady, and unwavering. I'm so sorry, Grace cried into his chest. I'm so sorry for everything I said. For doubting you. For being so cowardly. Shh, he whispered gently, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Not now. Right now, we're here for your grandmother. The rest? We'll talk about the rest later. And for the first time in weeks, Grace allowed herself to lean into him. The rest of the world for just a moment didn't matter. With a knowing smile, Grace saw Benjamin but said nothing. The surgery stretched on for another 4 hours. 4 hours of Benjamin sitting beside her, holding her hand, getting her coffee, and making small talk with the relatives when needed, being exactly what she needed. When the doctor finally emerged, everyone jumped to their feet. The surgery was a success, he said, and Grace almost collapsed in relief. We were able to remove the clot and minimize the damage. She'll need intensive physical therapy, but with time and care, we expect a significant recovery. Grace cried again, but this time it was from pure, exhausting joy. She's going to be okay, Benjamin whispered, his voice warm against her hair. Your grandmother's a fighter just like you. Later, when they were allowed to visit, Grace walked into her grandmother's room, pale but alive, breathing on her own, and there, present, she held the fragile hand of the woman who raised her. She made a silent promise to herself, no more running, no more letting fear control her life, no more wasting true love when it was right in front of her. When she left the room, Benjamin was waiting in the hall. They locked eyes for a long moment. Thank you, Grace said finally. For coming, for staying, for everything. Always, Benjamin answered simply. Can we talk? She asked hesitantly. For real this time? He nodded. They found an empty waiting area at the end of the hall. And finally, Grace was ready to fight for her love. The waiting room was quiet, save for the distant hum of hospital machinery and the ticking of the wall clock. Grace and Benjamin sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs, but neither of them seemed to notice the physical discomfort, the weight of the moment far more pressing. Grace stared at her hands, twisting them nervously in her lap. Where to begin? How could she apologize for destroying something so precious out of pure fear? I talked to my grandmother 2 weeks ago, she started, her voice low but steady. Before she had the stroke. I told her everything about you, about us, about how I messed it all up. Benjamin stayed silent, his blue eyes fixed on her with a guard that hadn't been there before. A protection against more pain. You know what she told me? Grace continued, her tears starting to fall again. She said, my girl, true love isn't about being deserving. It's about choice. And that man chose you every single day. The question is, are you going to choose him back or let the fear win? A muscle worked in Benjamin's jaw, but he said nothing. Grace sniffed, wiping her tears. And I realized she was right. You chose me, Benjamin. Every day, every week, in every decision. But I was so trapped in the past, so convinced I'd eventually be abandoned, that I created the very scenario I feared most. I pushed you away before you could leave me. Grace, no, Benjamin started, but she interrupted, lifting her eyes to meet his. I need you to understand, she said, her voice trembling. When that man hurt me at 16, he didn't just destroy my innocence. He destroyed my ability to trust, My belief that someone could want me for who I am, not for what they could take from me. And I carried that for 8 years like it was an identity, not just a wound. Benjamin leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees but keeping his distance. But then you showed up, Grace continued, a sad smile playing on her lips. This beautiful, successful, kind man who not only respected my boundaries, but celebrated them. Who waited when everyone else would have given up. And for the first time in almost a decade, I started to heal. You were healing, Benjamin said softly. The first thing he had said since they sat down. I saw it. In every smile, in every time you let me a little closer, in every moment of vulnerability you shared, you were getting stronger. I was, Grace agreed. But then the fear came back. That voice in my head telling me it was too good to be true. That eventually you'd realize I wasn't worth the effort. That our worlds were incompatible. And when Chloe showed up, when I saw those photos from the galas, all my insecurities exploded at once. But I explained about Chloe, Benjamin said, frustration edging his voice. I showed you she meant nothing more than a co-worker. Why wasn't that enough? Because I wasn't listening to you, Grace admitted, her tears flowing freely now. I was listening to that venomous voice in my head telling me I wasn't enough, and I chose to believe it instead of believing you. And for that, I am so sorry from the bottom of my heart. Benjamin, I am so sorry. The silence that followed was heavy. Benjamin ran his hands over his face. When he pulled them away, Grace saw that his eyes were damp, too. Do you know what was the hardest part? He finally said, his voice thick with emotion. It wasn't you doubting me. It was you doubting yourself, watching you constantly diminish yourself, comparing yourself to women who don't hold a candle to you, convincing yourself you didn't deserve to be loved. Because Grace, you are the most incredible person I've ever met. Grace sobbed, covering her face with her hands. But I ruined it. I pushed you away when I needed to trust you most. How can you forgive me? Benjamin moved then, kneeling in front of her and gently pulling her hands away from her face. Because I love you, he said simply. And real love doesn't give up at the first storm. But Grace, he continued, his voice low and serious, I need you to understand something very important. She nodded, holding her breath. I can love you, support you, choose you every day for the rest of my life. But I can't do the work of making you believe you're worthy of that love. That's something only you can do. And until you do, we'll keep coming back to this place. You'll keep sabotaging us every time your insecurities scream louder than my voice. The words were true and Grace knew it. You're right, she admitted. And I don't know if I can promise I'll never be scared again, that I'll never doubt again. But I can promise that I'll fight it. That I'll go back to therapy, work on my wounds, learn to see myself the way you see me. Because you deserve someone who fights for this as hard as you do, and I want to be that person. Benjamin studied her face for a long moment, searching for sincerity, for real determination. And when he found it, he nodded slowly. Okay, he said finally, but on conditions. Anything, Grace replied eagerly. First, he said, holding up a finger, you go back to therapy regularly, not just when things get hard. He held up a second finger. Second, when you feel the insecurities creeping back, you tell me. You don't hold it in. You don't let it fester until it explodes. We talk immediately. He paused, his eyes intense. Third, you let me all the way in. Not just the pretty parts, but the ugly parts too. The doubts, the fears, the scars, everything. Grace nodded eagerly. Yes to all of it. I promise. Fourth, he said, a glimmer of humor finally appearing. You officially introduce me to your grandmother when she wakes up. Because if we're going to do this right, I want her blessing. Grace laughed through her tears, throwing herself into his arms. I love you so much, she whispered against his chest. I love you in a way that terrifies me. And I know I won't be easy, that I'll have bad days, that I'll need patience, but I'll be here. Benjamin interrupted, pulling her back just enough to look into her eyes. On the good days and the bad, when you're strong and when you're breaking, because that's what partners do. They stay. He leaned in slowly, telegraphing his intent, giving her the choice. When their lips finally met, it felt like coming home after a long journey. The kiss was sweet but urgent, full of relief and renewed promises. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling through their tears. So what do we do now? Grace asked, her voice soft. Now? Benjamin stood up, pulling her with him. Now we get some decent coffee because this hospital coffee is terrible. Then we go back and sit with your grandmother for when she wakes up. And then we rebuild together at our pace. But together,
Together, Grace repeated, and the word had never sounded so beautiful.
hand in hand, they walked back to Evelyn's room. She was still sleeping, but there was color in her cheeks, and her chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. The machines around her beeped regularly, a comforting sound that signaled life.
She's going to love you, Grace said softly, watching her grandmother.
When she wakes up, she'll ask a million invasive questions and probably show you my baby pictures. Benjamin chuckled softly. I can't wait. They spent the rest of the day at the hospital. Cousin Rose and other relatives gradually left, but Benjamin stayed. He brought back decent food from a nearby restaurant. Grace insisted that Evelyn eat, even when she said she wasn't hungry, simply being present in all the ways that truly mattered. As the day faded into dusk, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges through the hospital window, Evelyn finally stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, and for a moment she seemed confused. But then her gaze settled on Grace.
Grandma!
Grace gasped, springing from her seat and rushing to her side.
You're awake!
How do you feel? Evelyn blinked a few times, still disoriented, before she focused on Grace. Her weak hand slowly reached out, finding her granddaughter's. My girl? Her voice was faint, but the recognition in her eyes was unmistakable. Then her gaze shifted to Benjamin, standing quietly in the back of the room. And who is this handsome fella? Grace laughed through her tears, a mix of relief and joy. Grandma, this is Benjamin, the man I told you about. The man I love. Evelyn studied Benjamin for a long moment, her sharp eyes never dulled by age. Then, with surprising strength for someone just out of brain surgery, she reached her free hand toward him. Benjamin stepped forward, kneeling beside the bed, and took her hand. You take care of my girl? Evelyn asked, her voice rough but clear. With my life, Benjamin replied without hesitation. She's the most precious thing in the world to me. Evelyn nodded slowly, clearly satisfied. Then she turned her attention back to Grace. This one you keep, she said, her eyes sparkling with a touch of humor. Don't let the fear win. I won't, Grandma, Grace promised, her grip tightening on her grandmother's hand. Never again. Later that night, after Evelyn was stable and the worst was behind them, Grace allowed herself to breathe more easily. With Benjamin by her side, she allowed herself to believe in something she hadn't dared to for a long time: happy endings. But the real test was still ahead. 3 weeks passed since Evelyn's stroke, and her recovery was progressing better than anyone had expected. Her speech was nearly fully restored, and she had begun intensive physical therapy. Grace split her time between the hospital, work, and spending time with Benjamin. Benjamin, however, had made a major decision. He had delegated most of his company's daily operations to his VP, leaving only the most crucial strategic meetings that he could attend via video conference. This allowed him to stay in Burlington during the week, close to Grace and the hospital. You don't have to do this, Grace said one night, as they sat down to dinner in the hotel room Benjamin had rented near the hospital. Benjamin poured her more wine, interrupting her with a gentle smile. You know what I realized? When you hire competent people and trust them, they do an exceptional job. Grace raised an eyebrow. And you don't miss it? The power? The total control? Benjamin took a moment before answering. I missed the feeling of building something, but I realized I was building the wrong thing. I was building an empty empire when I could be building a life, he said, his eyes locking with hers. With you. Grace's heart tightened at his words. True to my promise, she began hesitantly. When you talk like that, a part of me gets terrified. Terrified that you're sacrificing too much and that you'll regret it. Benjamin covered her hand with his. Thank you for telling me. And now let me tell you why this isn't a sacrifice. A sacrifice is when you give up something you love for something you want less. But I'm not giving up anything I love. I'm just reprioritizing. The company will be there. The deals will be there. But this moment, this phase of your grandmother's recovery, this time with you, this is irreplaceable. Grace blinked back tears, her fears slowly easing as he spoke. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, he replied, kissing her fingers. His voice softened. And actually, I need to tell you something. There's a dinner in 2 weeks in Burlington, a benefit gala for the hospital where your grandmother is being treated. My company is one of the main sponsors, so I have to be there, and I would like you to go with me. officially as my girlfriend. Grace's stomach clenched at the thought. A gala, his world, exactly the kind of situation that made her insecurities flare up. Benjamin, sensing her hesitation, quickly added, I know it's scary. I know there will be people from my world there, people who will judge you, people who will make snide comments. But Grace, if we're really going to do this, build a life together, eventually, you'll have to meet that side of my life. And I want it to be on my terms, with you by my side, showing everyone that you are the woman I choose. Grace's heart raced. The panic began to creep in, but instead of letting it take over, she paused and took a deep breath. She remembered her grandmother's words. She remembered her promise to fight the fear. Okay, she said, her voice trembling just slightly. I'll go. Benjamin's face broke into a smile, pure joy lighting up his features. Really? Really? He asked as if he couldn't quite believe it. Grace forced a smile, though her nerves still tangled in her stomach. But you'll have to help me because I have no idea what to wear, how to act. Benjamin grinned. You'll wear whatever makes you feel beautiful and comfortable, and you'll act exactly like yourself. Because, Grace, you don't need to pretend to be anyone but who you are. And anyone who has a problem with that can go to hell. She laughed, some of her nervousness melting away. You really want me to go with you? I do, Benjamin said, his voice full of conviction. And if we're going to do this, I need you to stop avoiding parts of my life. And because... His eyes softened and he touched her cheek gently. Because I trust you for real this time. The next 2 weeks flew by in a whirlwind. Evelyn's recovery continued to surprise the doctors, and she was soon able to walk short distances with the help of a walker. Benjamin had arranged for the best therapist to work with her, ensuring she'd have all the support she needed, both in the hospital and after she went home. You don't have to do all this, Grace protested when Benjamin mentioned he'd arranged for a private nurse to accompany Evelyn for 3 months once she was discharged. I know I don't, Benjamin replied. But I want to. Your grandmother is important to you, which makes her important to me. Evelyn, for her part, adored Benjamin. During her daily visits, she would ask him for stories and, with a sly grin, would inquire about his intentions. When are you going to ask my granddaughter to marry you, son? She teased, making both of them blush. As for the dress for the gala, Grace initially panicked. Benjamin suggested a personal shopper, but she refused. That felt too indulgent. Instead, Jessica drove her to a boutique in Burlington that sold elegant but affordable dresses. After trying on at least 20, Grace found the perfect one. It was a deep teal blue that made her brown eyes sparkle and complemented her olive skin. It wasn't the most expensive dress in the shop, but when she looked in the mirror for the first time, she saw herself as Benjamin saw her. Beautiful. Elegant enough. That's the one, Jessica declared with conviction. Benjamin is going to have a heart attack when he sees you. The night of the gala, as Grace got ready in the hotel room, her nerves threatened to overwhelm her. Her hands shook as she applied her makeup, soft yet enhancing her natural features. When she finally opened the door for Benjamin, the look on his face said everything. You are, he stammered, his voice full of awe as he looked at her. Absolutely breathtaking. Grace's nerves fluttered in her stomach. Is it not too much? Or too little? Benjamin gently cut her off with a soft kiss. You are perfect, he said with pure conviction. More beautiful than any woman at that event could ever be. Because you're real. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of a 5-star hotel in Burlington. When they entered, hand in hand, Grace felt every eye on them. Or more specifically, on her. She could practically hear the thoughts. Who is she? Where did he find her? She doesn't look like she's from our circle. But then Grace felt Benjamin's hand tighten around hers and heard him whisper, I'm right here. You're safe. And she breathed. The night unfolded surprisingly well. Benjamin introduced her to everyone as Grace, my girlfriend, with so much pride in his voice that it was impossible not to feel valued. Some people were cold, others curious, but many were genuinely kind. One of his partners, an older man named Richard, welcomed her with, So, you're the reason Benjamin is smiling again. Welcome to the madness of our corporate world. I hope he treats you better than he treats us. Grace laughed, gradually relaxing. But the defining moment came during dinner. Benjamin was called to the stage to give a speech about the importance of corporate philanthropy and the role business played in supporting public health. He spoke articulately, focusing on numbers, investments, and social impact. But then, at the end of his speech, he did something unexpected. Before I finish, I'd like to share something personal, Benjamin said, his eyes scanning the audience, seeking Grace out. A few months ago, I was living a life that looked successful on paper but felt empty in reality. I was focused only on profits and expansion, and I forgot what truly mattered. Then I met someone who reminded me that true success isn't measured in numbers, but in connections, in love, in moments that take your breath away, not because of their glamour, but because of their authenticity. The room fell silent. Grace felt the sting of tears in her eyes as Benjamin continued, his voice steady. "Tonight I'm here with the most incredible woman I've ever met," he said, gesturing toward Grace. "Grace, you taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that patience is love in action, that some things are worth infinitely more than any quarterly profit." The tears started flowing freely now, and she saw a few people in the crowd dabbing their eyes, others smiling. "So this speech, this night, this investment in the hospital, it's all because of you. If it weren't for your grandmother being treated in that very hospital, I never would have understood the real importance of what we do." Grace couldn't hold back the tears now. The crowd seemed to soften, their faces touched by the emotion in his words. When Benjamin stepped down from the stage, he went straight to her, ignoring everyone else who wanted to congratulate him. "You just declared yourself to 300 people," Grace whispered, half laughing, half crying. "I did," he said with a smirk, wiping her tears gently with his thumbs. "Any problem with that?" "None," she replied softly. "None at all." Later that night, back in their hotel room, shoes kicked off and Benjamin's tie loosened, they lay side by side on the bed, simply looking at each other. "You were incredible tonight," Benjamin said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "You know that, right?" Grace smiled shyly. "I was terrified." "I know," he said, pulling her a little closer. "But you went anyway. That's courage." Grace traced the outline of his jaw with her fingers, committing the feeling to memory. "Benjamin," she began, taking a deep breath, "I want to tell you something important." "What?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady even though her cheeks flushed. "For you." He blinked, clearly confused.
Ready for what?
Grace swallowed hard, her heart racing, but she didn't hesitate. "I'm ready to be yours, completely." Understanding crossed his face, but there was also a mix of desire and concern. "Grace, are you sure?" "You don't have to." She interrupted him, her voice firm but soft. "I know I don't have to. But I want to. For the first time in my life, I truly want to." And that night, under the soft glow of Burlington's city lights, Grace gave herself completely. Not out of pressure, not out of obligation, but because of love, and it was everything she had dreamed it could be. The next morning, Grace woke to the soft light filtering through the curtains. For a moment, she felt disoriented, not recognizing where she was. Then she felt the warmth of a strong arm around her waist and the solid presence of Benjamin's body against her back. Slowly, the memories of last night rushed back to her, and her face flushed with a mixture of shyness and deep satisfaction. Benjamin's voice, soft and sleepy, whispered against her neck. "Good morning." Grace turned to face him, her heart skipping a beat as she met his soft blue eyes, still heavy with sleep. "Good morning," she replied, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "How are you feeling?" His expression softened, and for a brief moment he looked vulnerable. "How are you feeling?" "I'm happy," Grace answered honestly, her fingers gently tracing his jaw. "For the first time in a long time, I am truly happy." Benjamin smiled, his face lighting up with a radiance that made Grace's heart swell. "Me too," he said, pulling her closer, burying his face in her hair. "God, Grace, I love you so much. You have no idea." They lay there, holding each other, savoring the quiet intimacy. There were no words needed, just the comforting presence of each other. Eventually, hunger nudged them out of bed. They ordered room service, an extravagance Grace normally would have refused, but this time she accepted without hesitation.
They ate in bed, sharing food and laughter, and Grace allowed herself to bask in the simplicity of the moment.
"I need to tell you something," Benjamin said, as he poured them both a second cup of coffee. His serious tone made Grace look up at him. "I'm thinking of moving the company headquarters from New York to Burlington," he said, his eyes fixed on hers as he waited for her reaction. Grace nearly dropped her cup in surprise. "What? Benjamin, you can't do that!" "The company has been based in New York for decades. All your contacts are there." He interrupted her gently. "Grace, New York isn't my home. It never really was. It was just where the company was. But you're here. Your grandmother is here. And I've realized I'd rather build a life where the people I love are than keep a company in a city that means nothing to me. But that's huge, Grace protested, her heart racing with a mix of hope and worry. What if it goes wrong? What if you regret it? Benjamin met her eyes, his voice steady with conviction. I won't regret it, and I'm not doing this impulsively. I've already talked to my lawyers, my accountants, and to Richard. It's completely viable. Burlington has a growing tech scene, tax incentives for companies that relocate, and frankly, the quality of life here is much better. Grace didn't know what to say. The weight of his words left her speechless. You don't have to answer now, Benjamin continued quickly. I just wanted you to know that I'm committed to this. To you, to us. And if that means reconfiguring my entire life, then that's what I'm going to do. Grace pulled him into a deep kiss, pouring all the gratitude and love she couldn't express in words. The next few weeks were full of transitions. Grace's grandmother was discharged from the hospital and moved to a rehab facility in Stowe, where she would continue therapy. Benjamin had arranged everything, paying for the best professionals and top-of-the-line equipment, despite Grace's protests. Let me do this, he said gently, not as charity but as family, because your grandmother is my family now too. Grace returned to work at the lodge, but things were different. Chloe, realizing she had no chance with Benjamin, became polite but professional, no longer venomous. Benjamin continued to split his time between New York and Burlington, but he spent more and more time in Vermont. He rented an apartment in Burlington, elegant but not ostentatious, and began to slowly integrate Grace into more aspects of his life. One Saturday, 2 months after that night in the hotel, Benjamin showed up with an unexpected proposal. Come with me, he said, eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. Where? Grace asked, curious. It's a surprise. They drove for about 20 minutes, eventually arriving at a plot of land on the outskirts of Stowe. The land was wide open, surrounded by pine trees and overlooking the mountains. What do you think? Benjamin asked, watching her take in the view. It's beautiful, Grace said honestly, but her brow furrowed. But why are we here? Because I was thinking, he started, pausing as if unsure. What if we built something here? Not a house, not yet. But, he hesitated again, what if we built your bakery? Grace blinked, sure she had misheard. My what, your bakery? Benjamin smiled, taking her hands gently in his. You've been talking about this dream for months, and this land is perfect. Close to Stowe for the tourist traffic, but isolated enough to be charming. We can design it from scratch, build it exactly as you've always dreamed. And Grace, I want to invest in this, not as charity, but as a partner. You bring the talent and the vision. I'll put up the capital and the expertise. 50-50 on everything. Tears welled up in Grace's eyes before she could even process his words. You would do that for me? Not for you, he corrected gently. With you. There's a difference. I want to build something with you, Grace. Not just a relationship, but a life, a future. And if part of that future is watching you achieve your dream, then nothing would make me happier. In the middle of the empty plot of land that would one day become her dream bakery, Grace kissed him with all the emotion she felt. For the first time, she allowed herself to fully imagine it. A cozy bakery with wooden walls and large windows where she could create edible art and share her passion with the world. Yes, she said, her voice trembling. Yes, let's do this together. The months that followed were filled with planning. Benjamin officially began moving the company's headquarters to Burlington, and Grace started working with architects on the bakery design. Excitement buzzed in every meeting. True to her promise, Grace returned to therapy, facing the painful memories and deep-rooted insecurities, but she was determined, and slowly, things began to shift. You're different, Benjamin said one night, as they shared a quiet dinner in his apartment. More light. I feel different, Grace admitted, her voice soft. Therapy is helping me see that my worth doesn't depend on anyone's approval. I was always enough. I just couldn't see it before. Benjamin smiled, his eyes full of pride. I'm so proud of you, of the work you're doing, the courage you show every day. It wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, moments when the old insecurities came rushing back. But Grace kept moving forward with Benjamin by her side, offering love and support. Grace attended a social event, and once again she felt that familiar pang of inadequacy. But this time, instead of bottling it up, She reached out to Benjamin. "I saw the photo and I'm having feelings," she admitted, her voice steady yet vulnerable. They talked honestly, openly, with no accusations or defensiveness. It was a raw, real conversation, and in the end, it only made them stronger. It was like that for almost a year of growth, learning, and building together. The bakery slowly started to take shape. Walls went up, equipment was installed, and what had once been just a dream became a tangible reality. Through it all, Benjamin stood by her side, not as a savior, but as an equal partner, celebrating the successes and supporting her through the challenges. Grandma Evelyn had fully recovered and returned to her home in Waterville, but she visited Stowe often, checking on the bakery's progress. "That man is special," she told Grace during one visit. "You hold on to him, my girl. Hold on tight." Grace smiled, her heart full. "I will, Grandma," she promised. Forever. And forever was closer than she imagined. It was Christmas Eve again, exactly 1 year since that night that changed everything. 1 year since Grace had delivered a Christmas dinner to a mysterious stranger, only to end up delivering her heart too. The bakery, named Sweet Evelyn's in honor of her grandmother, had opened just 2 weeks ago. It was already a success. People came from near and far to try her pastries, and it had even been featured in a regional food magazine. But today the bakery was closed. Today was special. Benjamin had insisted on spending Christmas Eve exactly where it all began, in Chalet 7 at the Pineoft Lodge. Grace had laughed when he suggested it. "Seriously? That's so cheesy." But Benjamin had smiled, unashamed. Perfectly appropriate. And so there she was, walking the familiar trail to the chalet, dressed in a simple yet elegant red dress. A year ago she would have been terrified, but now she was filled with anticipation. Benjamin stood at the door, looking devastatingly handsome in a black wool sweater and dark trousers. But his eyes were full of nervousness, anticipation. It made Grace's heart race. "Welcome," he said with a grand bow. The chalet was transformed. Candles flickered on every surface. Rose petals led the way to the fireplace, and a Christmas tree, fully decorated, sparkled in the corner. The same table they had shared that first meal was now set for 2, but this time Benjamin had prepared the food. "You cooked?" Grace asked, surprised and touched. "I tried," he admitted sheepishly. "It won't be as good as yours, but I put love into every dish." "Isn't that what you always say makes the difference?" Tears sprang to her eyes as she realized just how far they'd come. The meal was far from perfect, but it was full of love and care. They talked about the past year, how much they had changed, the challenges they'd overcome, and the victories they'd celebrated. "Remember when you told me you'd never been touched?" Benjamin asked as they reached dessert. "A cheesecake," he said, admitting he had bought it. "Some things are beyond my abilities." Grace smiled, remembering. "How could I forget?" "I made you a promise that night," Benjamin continued. "I said you'd only be touched when you were ready on your time." He took her hand, his voice full of emotion. "And you know what I discovered? It was worth every second of the wait. Because when you finally gave yourself to me, it wasn't out of pressure. It was out of love. And that made it infinitely more special." Grace could barely speak through the tears that had started to flow. "But there's something else I want to ask you," he continued, his voice trembling. Grace's heart raced as he stood up, then knelt beside her, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Grace," he began, his voice filled with emotion. "Exactly 1 year ago, you walked into this chalet carrying more than just food. You carried scars, fears, and a heart that had been broken and carefully rebuilt. Somehow, miraculously, you let me in." Tears streamed down her face as he continued. "In this past year, you've taught me what love really means. Not the love from movies or books, but real love. The kind that requires patience, communication, and daily effort. The kind that grows through challenges instead of crumbling. The kind that chooses to stay and fight every single day." He opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring, a green emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. "So, I'm asking you, Grace Stone, if you'll let me touch your life in one more way. Will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband, your partner, the person who chooses you every day for the rest of our lives?" Grace could hardly breathe as she nodded vigorously, tears pouring down her cheeks. "Is that a yes?" Benjamin asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes!" Grace managed to say. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes." Benjamin slid the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking, and then pulled her into his arms. He spun her around the room, their laughter mingling with their tears. I love you so much, he whispered against her hair. So much it scares me sometimes. I love you too, Grace whispered back, holding his face between her hands. You were the best gift I could have ever received. Not just that Christmas, but every day since. They kissed under the soft glow of the candles and Christmas tree, sealing the promise they both intended to keep for a lifetime. Epilogue. 6 months later, their wedding took place on a beautiful June day in an intimate ceremony in the gardens of the lodge where it all began. Only their closest family and friends, 70 people who truly mattered, were present. Grace wore a simple white lace dress, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. Grandma Evelyn was in the front row, tears of joy streaming down her face. On the other side, Benjamin's father wasn't there, but his love for his son lived on through him. When Benjamin saw Grace walking toward him down the aisle, he couldn't hold back his tears. For the first time in his life, he didn't care about being vulnerable in front of anyone. You're beautiful, he whispered when she reached him. And you're crying, she teased gently, wiping his tears away. I'm a man in love with the most incredible woman in the world, he replied without shame. I'm allowed to cry. Their vows were personal, written by them. Benjamin promised eternal patience and unconditional love. Grace promised daily courage and constant trust. They both promised to choose each other every day in every circumstance. When the officiant finally declared, "You may kiss the bride," Benjamin dipped her in a kiss so cinematic that the crowd cheered. The reception was at Sweet Evelyn's, the bakery that represented Grace's realized dreams. She had personally made their wedding cake, 5 tiers of edible art. It was almost too beautiful to eat, but too delicious to resist. Later, as they danced their first dance as husband and wife to "Can't Help Falling in Love," Benjamin leaned in and whispered in her ear, "I have another surprise for you." "Another one?" Grace laughed. "You've already given me a perfect wedding, a bakery, a life I never dreamed was possible." "Check the pocket of your dress," he said, smiling mysteriously. Confused, Grace slipped her hand into a small pocket she hadn't even noticed. She pulled out a piece of paper, lab results. Her heart stopped. Are we 3 months?" she asked. Benjamin confirmed with a smile that stretched from ear to ear. "I found out 2 weeks ago when you mentioned feeling sick. I had you take a test while you were sleeping." Grace burst into laughter and tears. "You stole my pee?" "For a good cause," he defended, laughing too. And now Grace was carrying their child. The rest of the night they danced under the lights, laughing, crying, and celebrating. In their new home on the outskirts of Stowe, Grace stood in front of their Christmas tree, 6 months pregnant, holding her growing belly. Everything had fallen into place. The bakery was thriving. Benjamin's company was settled in Burlington. Grandma Evelyn was just 5 minutes away, living in a comfortable house they'd bought for her. Benjamin wrapped his arms around Grace from behind, his hands resting protectively on her belly. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "That 2 years ago I was alone, scared, and convinced I'd never experience real love," Grace replied, covering his hands with hers. "And now I have everything. A husband who adores me, a baby on the way, a dream come true, a family." Benjamin turned her to face him. "When you whispered, 'I've never been touched,' you weren't just talking about physical touch. You were talking about never being truly seen, heard, or valued." Grace smiled through her happy tears. "And the best gift you gave me was touching my soul before my body. And that made all the difference." They kissed again under the Christmas tree 2 years after that first night, with an entire future ahead of them, a future full of love that transformed not just their bodies, but their souls. And they knew deep down that the greatest gifts didn't come wrapped in pretty paper. They came disguised as mysterious strangers, patiently waiting until hearts could find the courage to open up again. When they did, the reward was a love worth every tear, every fear overcome, and every vulnerable moment.